with a focus on the indigenous Philippine society and culture, its belief, system, and religion. Please help me welcome our first speaker who will talk about the pre-colonial Philippine boats and shipbuilding, Dr. Maria Bernadette Abrera.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the very kind invitation from Dr. Noel Rodriguez and Kim Derama. I wish to congratulate the conveners for this conference. My lecture for this morning will be on Philippine boats and shipbuilding, but I will be focusing on the maritime connections and relationships that the boats built, and these connections and relationships established an identity not only for the archipelago, the Philippine archipelago, but also a common identity for Southeast Asia. And this was carried on through the maritime and the seafaring tradition that we find in this region. So the Philippine boats, I will be discussing the regional context of the boats, and I will discuss the Philippine boats. The regional context will be primarily Southeast Asia. I am showing you a map, not only of Southeast Asia, but widening it because the context of Southeast Asia would be between the very big ports of China and India. So that will constitute a wider context for the development of the Southeast Asian maritime connection. So I will consider that the maritime connections within Southeast Asia would be one system, so that what we in the Philippines call the West Philippine Sea would actually show itself to be historically a Southeast Asian Sea because of that connection and the relationships that sea built around within the countries in that area. Okay. This regional context will lead to an identity, a maritime identity of Southeast Asia. And the Philippine maritime identity is situated precisely in that context. That identity will the earliest that I can trace to the development of that identity would be the Dongson culture. However, it is not certain yet. We still have to look at a lot of archaeological, I don't know if there will be historical records, archaeological data, if that connection was also initiated from the Philippines. But definitely at the moment, we have theories that probably there were traveling craftsmen, and also although the evidence of the most material, of course, would be the Dongson drums. We have not found them in the Philippines, but we have other evidence of connection to this Dongson culture because the archaeological artifacts, the earliest would be around 300 BC. So although the Dongson drums, right now there are no artifacts in the Philippines, we have other evidence that we were already in a connection during the this period of the Dongson culture? Because we have boat coffins. Okay, so there are boat coffins all over the region, and it is a representation that the boat coffins are representative of the Dongson culture. And we have a lot of boat coffins in the Philippines. I'm showing you boat coffins from Palawan, a boat coffin displayed in Cagayan de Oro, and a boat coffin from Bohol. And of course, you are familiar with the cover of the Manunggul burial jar. Is a secondary burial jar. There is a boat on the lid, and there are two figures on that boat. They are interpreted to represent the boat of the deceased and the soul of the deceased and the soul of the person who brings the deceased towards the afterlife, to the kabilang buhay. And then a historical document from an encomendero from Panay Island in the Philippines tells us that there is a belief among the Hiligaynon that the god, the deity Magwayen, carries the soul of the dead in his barangay. So they are carried off to the afterlife through the barangay. So there is actually a lot more research regarding the soul boats, and because of the animist culture, the soul of the boat itself. Okay. Now, in the historical records, I have to say that the presentation will end in the late 16th century, at the beginning of the Spanish colonial period in the Philippines, specifically at an event in 1587. It's called in Philippine history, it's called the Tondo Conspiracy, or the Conspiracy of the Maharlikas. And I am demarcating the development of the maritime connections and relationships in 1587 because that was a definitive the revolt did not push through, but it was a definitive event, so that it ended the relationship with the very strong relationship with Southeast Asia, especially Borneo, and then it shifted that maritime world and the relationship from Southeast Asia towards the Pacific Ocean, leading to Acapulco in Mexico, and then to Cadiz in Spain. So that maritime connection would start in that shift by the end of the 16th century, and it starts with the Tondo Conspiracy. Okay, so the historical record that we have in states that by the 10th century, in 977 AD, Mai, which we know to be located in the archipelago, in the southern Tagalog area. Mindoro claims, of course, that it is Mai, although it could be a wider area and not just Mindoro itself. Now, the appearance of Mai in Chinese records for the first time was through the report of 3 Borneans. We are told in the Sung Annals. It was through the report of 3 Borneans who were sent by the King of Borneo as his envoys to China. And then in 982, the traders from Mai themselves embarked with some precious commodities and arrived at the coast of Canton. This is important for us not only because it mentions Mai and also because it tells us that the connection of the Philippines with China was first initiated by the Filipinos, by residents in the islands. So it was this time when seafaring was very active. The Filipinos were very active in seafaring, particularly in the South China Sea. So this is also important for us because it tells us it leads us to the connection between the archipelago and Borneo, between the Philippines and Borneo, which will be a very strong connection that will be revealed in the account of Pigafetta, which we know to be the first account of the Spanish colonizers when they arrived in the Philippines. So it is very important for us then to realize this. But this connection with China is recorded not only in the historical documents, it is recorded also in our oral history, particularly in two Visayan epics, Datong Sumanga and Bugbong Humasanon, and the Ilocano epic Lamang. In the Visayan epic, where we see a princess, Humasanon, who was courted by a datu. She was actually asking for dowry, and she was demanding for him to bring her slaves from all these areas, from Caraga, Camiguin, Dapitan, Mindanao, and Jolo. So many slaves that she was demanding. And then finally, she demanded that he go to China and fill his ship with slaves and other measures of wealth. And in that epic, finally, the Dato blows his top, and then he threatens the Humasanon, that if she continues to play coy, he's going to head to her residence and cut off her hair. And then she finally relents because it was such a grave threat for a woman to have her hair cut off. In the Ilocano epic Lamang, we find that Lamang actually is a trader. He owns, in the epic it says that he owns 2 balangay, and those balangay are golden balangay. The presence of the golden balangay that he owns is revealed at the time that he has to go and ask for the hand of Ines Canoyan, the lady whom he seeks to marry. And the mention of 2 golden ships, golden balangay, trading with China from the Ilocos is important to us because later on, Pigafetta will mention that they will actually see ships, but he mentions those ships to be Parao, and those ships were owned by the Sultan of Borneo. And I think it will be in this presentation later, the description of the Parao, of the dati of King of Borneo, the Sultan of Borneo, having the prow and the stern in gold. Okay. But in the epic of Lamang, the entire ship itself is covered in gold. Now, when the when Southeast Asia was discovered by the Portuguese, or the earliest it fell to the Portuguese in 1511. One of those who immediately came to Southeast Asia, to Malacca in particular, was Tome Perez, and he mentions that in Malacca there were populations, various populations, and among those populations from Southeast Asia, he mentions the Lusoes. So it is interpreted, the Lusoes is interpreted as being Luzon. So therefore, these are populations of people from Luzon who not only come to Malacca in order to trade, but there is also a village in Malacca populated by these Lusoes, because Perez mentions that the Lusoes had their own villages. There were actually two villages in a place that he identified as Mimjang. And then one of the villages in that place of Mimjam was inhabited by the Malays. And further up, he said, there was another place inhabited by the Lusoes. And the Malays and the Lusoes, he said, were always at variance. Not always, they were often at variance. So there was already a settlement for the Lusoes in Malacca. He wrote this by 1512 to 1515. So very early in the 16th century, we find a historical document saying that there was already a settlement in Malacca. And Malacca was a thriving commercial port. It was a very rich place. And not only were the Lusoes having their own village in Malacca, but they were also assigned their own sabandar. The sabandar, Perez explains, were like they were like municipal officers, but they were more like customs officers, because they received the captains of the ships that arrived in Malacca. So meaning to say, when you receive the captain of the ship, you also receive the tax, the customs duties. So the men from Lusoes were among a group classified with the Southeast Asian men who had their own sabandar assigned to them. So meaning to say, it was quite a significant exchange that was going on recorded in the early 16th century. So that means even prior to that, there was already an exchange and a commercial relationship at the very least between the Philippine archipelago and the port of Malacca. And then Lusoes again are among the list of people who trade in Malacca, recorded by Perez, and where he says that there were at least 84 languages that were being spoken in that trading port. So it speaks to us of a very thriving relationship, maritime relationship. It was precisely a seaborne relationship. And after this, after Malacca, now we find from so that's 1512 to 1515. In 1521, Magellan's expedition would find its way to the Philippine Islands. They would first enter the area, and they would find the island of Humonhon. So that is where Pigafetta describes it as an uninhabited island, but precisely when they disembarked in that uninhabited island, it was not unnoticed by the local community, because the following day there was already a boat coming to them. And Pigafetta says there were 9 men in it. This boat was annotated to be a parao. I am showing you illustrations of a parao, but the bigger illustration where it says parao pirata, that's an illustration at the Museo Naval made by Rafael Monleon. He was the director of the Museo Naval in the late 19th century. He labels it as a parao pirata, but that is from Mindanao, and that's a 19th century illustration. And in the 18th century, this parao as a warship was actually mentioned by Thomas Forrest as a mangayaw prao. Mangayaw prao. So mangayaw is the term for war by at sea. So it was a mangayaw prao. It was also labeled in a vocabulary list as uwang prao, uwang mangayaw. So prao could have been a Malay term, because even Pires in Malacca uses the term parao. He says the ordinary people who went to Malacca in order to trade, they were bringing pigs and chickens and other foodstuff. They came in parao. So usually the reference to parao in the historical records would always put them to be utilized by ordinary, by the common population, not the elite, because Pigafetta would identify the datu to be in a balangay, not in a parao. The smaller illustration is an illustration in the late 16th century. The date there given is 1598. That was included by Monleon in his rather lengthy description of the parao. So when we look at historical records and we go only by the terms, actually it is a little difficult to reconstruct and to identify the boats, unless it is precisely like Monleon's document, where he puts labels. Although the weakness there would actually be that Monleon already published it late in the 19th century. So what was that parao that Pigafetta saw? With the men coming towards them, there were 9 in it, and he said that they gave the men in that boat some trinkets. It included a red cup and some other things that they tied in a stick, and then they threw them down at the small boat. And then after a couple of hours, the men in that parao, they returned towards the ship of Magellan, and then they came with their datu. Pigafetta calls it the raha. They came with their raha, and that raha was in a balangay. So it was a bigger boat, and it was identified with the chief. The chief actually it was translated as king, but eventually in the word list of Pigafetta, he says that the king is called a Raha. So the Balangay, he said, was a big boat, and the Raha never left the Balangay. He only allowed some of the people with him to board the Spanish boat, but the king remained in his Balangay. Eventually, he invited some of the Spaniards to come to shore with him, and Pigafetta was one of those men who went to shore, and he was led by the Raha to a place with a bamboo covering, and under that bamboo covering was a balangay. It was a lengthy balangay because it was about 80 palms in length. And Pigafetta says that it resembled, this is the balangay. Again, that's a 19th century illustration. So it would appear that the length corresponds to how Pigafetta would describe it in the 16th century. But the awnings on that barangay could be a temporary structure if it would be used for long periods of sail, and the people would need shelter from the elements. So that is an illustration in the 19th century along with this. And the balangay, there was a balangay pequeño, so it could come in many sizes, from the a small balangay to a large one. But this was definitely bigger than the parao or the baloto, which was the smallest boat in the historical records. Okay, the small boats would be the baloto, and these are the Visayan terms. Visayan terms will not include bangka. Bangka would be in the Tagalog word lists, and the description of the bangka would be exactly the description for a baloto. Okay, so in the Visayas, Pigafetta gives the term baloto for a small boat. He also gives a term sampan, which he says small boat. But there is a qualification. Their small boats is called baloto. So meaning to say, the small boat sampan refers to a foreign boat, because those that belonged to the indigenous population was called by another term. And the large boats were the balangay. So balangay in the Tagalog vocabulary lists was a common boat in the islands. The Tagalog balangay was classified as either a manganim or a mangapat. And it referred to the number of planks for the seating in the balangay. So it could accommodate either 12 to 16 passengers. So this would mean the manganim or the mangapat would be a 17th century dictionary Tagalog term. So that means this was, if we consider that it was called a large boat, so it could have been this type of boat that could accommodate 12 to 16 passengers. The small and the large, we really have to put them in context, especially with Pigafetta, who finds all the descriptions of, not all, but he mentions the balangay is like a fusta. he compares it with a fusta. This is an illustration of a fusta that I found. That's a 16th century illustration of a Portuguese fusta by a Dutch merchant and trader. So the balangay was compared to a fusta. Eventually, Pigafetta would also compare the parao to a fusta. So maybe that's the common boat that he was working with, coming from his own cultural world. So that would be the common boat for him as a Portuguese. Okay. So the balangay, okay. The balangay had a rudder. You can see from the illustration, even in the 19th century, that the balangay had a rudder, and it could steer the direction. And there was also a roof made of coconut leaves in the balangay. So that was the other illustration. That roof of coconut leaves was called karang in Tagalog. The balangay was praised by Combes in the 17th century as an excellent boat for seafaring. He said it was very swift and very light with a very thin prow. And another Jesuit missionary, this also in the Visayas, because Combes was in Mindanao. In the Visayas, the Jesuit missionary, Father Francisco Alsina, he also praised the balangay as a very light craft. It was made of planks and it was rowed with oars. And the small ones with pointed ends, he said, they were called bugsay. Okay. So balangay, the balangay was really a very common boat. By its name itself, it became a reference for the boat builder, because among the Tagalog, the craftsman was called a panday, and it depended on the material with which he worked for his profession. A panday who worked with gold was panday ginto, or a goldsmith. A panday who worked with iron, or an ironsmith, was called a panday bakal. And a panday who worked with wood, making boats, was called a panday balangay. A general term for a panday who worked with wood, it could have been a carpenter making houses. He was a panday kayo. So kayo would be wood. So, but very specifically, it would be a panday balangay among the Tagalogs. So, balangay would have also political significance in the islands, as we saw in Pigafetta's account. Okay, so here, and this is the reference to the ship with gold parts. In Borneo, they saw a very beautiful prow whose bow and stern were worked in gold. At the bow flew a white and blue banner surrounded with peacock feathers. Some men were playing on musical instruments and drums. Two small boats came with that prow. Okay, so Pigafetta labels it as a prow. Again, it is this prow that he says it resembles a fusta. So earlier in Cebu, he said the balangay resembles a fusta. So that's very subjective. But we see here that there is now another kind of boat. It's still called a parao, but it has a ceremonial function, because it is extraordinary. So it has gold parts at the bow and the stern, and then it had banners. And along with the banners, there were peacock feathers. There is actually references in the earliest dictionaries of Philippine languages of both parts that describe precisely the symbol, which would be, the symbol would be the parts that are decorations. The general term for both decorations were samno, and then symbol would be plumes. So we can refer to this description of a Bornean parao that it had peacock feathers, although we see that it could have been, the symbol could have been made of other materials. If you recall the epic of Bugbong Humasanon, it was actually her hair whom the Datu threatened. I'm going to cut off your hair and make it a samno for my ship. Okay, so it meaning to say it could also be human hair and not only feathers of fowls. In the dictionary terms in the Philippines, samno could be also of chicken feathers. With the Sultan, it was of peacock feathers. So it would depend now on the economic and social status of the owner of the parao. I'm showing you an early 20th century boat in Holo because that has the samno. And at the top of the samno, the banners, at the top there is a symbol. So you can see it at the uppermost part of the mast. And that has a different function. Not for trading, it has a ceremonial function. Even the vinta would have, in the description of Monleon, the vinta would also have ceremonial functions because it was the vinta that would be used by the Sultan when he went to visit colonial officials. So he did not go in any other kind of boat but a vinta, and the vinta had very colorful masts. So there was really a distinction of the boats and the functions of these boats. I'm showing you an illustration, 17th century of the Manila Bay. And at the foreground, this is very significant for us because later on, by the 19th century, there would be another illustration of the Manila Bay, but the indigenous Philippine boats would no longer be present, and at the foreground would be foreign ships, meaning to say European ships, and there would only be in the background small indigenous boats. But in the early 17th century, this illustration still gives us in the foreground the large indigenous boats that were being built in the archipelago. Okay, so in the description of Pigafetta of the Bornean hunko, he says there were hunkos. He says that the bottom part is built of about 2 palms above the water, so the freeboard will be higher than the baloto or the bangka. probably it would be similar to a balangay, but being of a higher freeboard, it was a bigger ship. The bottom part is built about 2 palmos above the water, and it is made of planks fastened with wooden pegs, and they are very well made. And they are made entirely above the water. The parts of the ship are made of very large bamboos, and they have bamboo as a counterweight. So it is here in the pangko that we will find a counterweight. Okay. So we see that they would find these outriggers in the islands. Okay, the masts are also made of bamboo. Okay, so in the 18th century map of the Jesuit missionary Murillo Velarde, we will find other Philippine ships in the details of his map. We find here these boats, but these boats are also indicated in areas in the Philippines that are no longer within the colonial center. So meaning to say, around Manila Bay, in his map, there are no indigenous Philippine boats. They are all of galleon and other Spanish ships. These boats, the Huanga, the Pangko, even the Caracoa, they would be found outside of the colonial center. And it is significant also to note that the indigenous process of shipbuilding that are still in existence up to the present, although they already use iron nails in substitution for the wooden pegs. They are also found in the periphery of the archipelago, meaning Sibutu, in Tawi-Tawi, and in Batanes. So we will find then that these boats are either binilog. Binilog would be made from a single piece of timber, or they would be tinimbao. Tinimbao would be the generic term for boats that were made from planks, because the planks were called timbao. But the tinimbao planks were so solid because they were trying to make it appear that the tinimbao was also made from only one piece of wood. Okay, so that was what they were gunning for, that it should be as sturdy and as strong as if it were made from a single piece of wood. Okay. So we come to the Caracoa, and you will see here the entire map of Murillo Velarde. And the Caracoa, I'm pointing to the places where in the map where the Caracoa is illustrated. So it is not within the colonial center. Also, it is the Caracoa would be from the Malay kuda-kuda or horse. So it was a warship, but there were also other warships. I mentioned already that warships in Maguindanao were called Uang Mangayaw. The Mangayaw in the Visayas used the biggest logs owing to the numerous wars and raids that they had to undergo. The Mangayaw is mentioned by Mentrida to be to have its root in the word ayaw. Okay. And in the study of Dr. Rodriguez herself, she pointed out that there were two kinds of warfare: the pangungubat, the war carried out on land, which was pangahat, and war carried out on sea, which was the pangayaw. Okay, so there was a specific strategy of pangayaw, which was the bangga. The bangga was an intentional ramming of one's boat against the enemy ship. Okay. It was different from the sudden, unexpected encounter with an enemy ship. The unexpected encounter was called sumpong, but the intentional ramming of the boat was a bangga. Okay, so okay. Now the warships. Okay, the warships had lantakas. I think you will see that in here. The Portuguese ship has lantakas also, but here we will also find that there were lantakas in the buanga. Okay, because this one was used for raids and for war. The lantakas or the cannons are found here at the front, and there would also be lantakas jutting out at the sides of the warships. Okay. We will find that in the 17th century here, Alcina illustrated several kinds of indigenous boats, and some of them we do not find in either the word lists or other existing historical documents, such as this small boat, the Rambo or Coralan, which would be smaller than a baloto. Okay. So there were really numerous ships in the Philippines, and adding some parts to it, such as adding to the freeboard through barks of trees, it would change the name of the boat. So the boats could actually refer to only a basic form of a boat, but additions to the boat, such as the sombol or adding to its freeboard, it could change the term that they used for the boats. Okay. In the Philippine epics, almost all of the epics have boats, references to boats, and some of them refer to boats used for war, but most of them relate the boats in connection with a woman, with marriage and courtship. So we will find that a lot of this culture would revolve around boats, and we are not even speaking yet of the belief system that are also the belief system that is also founded on boats. Okay. Now, the showing you a map of the areas where had a plan to attack the Spaniards who were already in Intramuros in Manila in order to take them out. This would be very early in the colonial period. So if they had come to Manila only by 1572, by 1587, the datos of beginning from Tondo to Bulacan to Pampanga, they would be in talks with the datos from Palawan and then from Borneo, so that in tandem they would attack Intramuros and take out the Spaniards who had begun to settle in Intramuros. Japan is included in this map because there was a Japanese captain who came to Manila, and the datos from Tondo were talking with him in order to ask for weapons to be supplied from Japan. So this is significant because in Pigafetta's reference, in Pigafetta's observations, after they left Cebu upon the death of Magellan, they were able to go to Borneo, and in Borneo they found there the son of the Datu of Tondo, and that son of the Datu of Tondo was a captain general. He recalled that the son of this Datu of Tondo was a captain general of the Sultan of Borneo, and he had raided the northern part of Borneo because he wanted to bring the Datu of that area under the submission of the Sultan of Borneo. So there was a very close link between the ruling family of Tondo and the ruling family of Borneo. It is not only in Tondo where we find that political connection, political and also a social connection through marriage, but also with the Sulu Sultanate, because Pigafetta mentions that the Sultan of Sulu had as his wife the daughter of the Sultan of Sulu. And it was his wife from Sulu, the Sulu Sultanate, who told the Sultan of Borneo that her father, the Sultan of Sulu, owned two large pearls that was as big, pearls that were as big as chicken eggs. And they were so round that they would roll. They would not stay put when you put them on a table, for example, that they would roll. And so it was desired by the Datu, by the Sultan of Borneo, so that he went to raid the Sultan of Sulu in order to obtain those pearls. And by 1521, they were already reported to be in Borneo. Now, the account of Pigafetta says that when the Sultan of Borneo went to went to Sulu, he had, this is where it becomes tricky. One translation, one copy of Pigafetta says he had with him 500 paraos in order to threaten the Sultan of Sulu to give him those pearls. But in another copy of Pigafetta, it says there were 50 paraos. So was there an additional zero in the number of paraos? But in any case, it still speaks to us of the political and economic capacity of the Sultanate in order to enforce its will among other ethnic states. So the Tondo conspiracy by 1587, it did not push through because it was discovered, and the Spaniards moved swiftly and very violently. They beheaded the major conspirators. They burned down the property, and then they sprinkled salt on the burned property. There was a lot of cultural and spiritual significance in that retaliation towards a conspiracy. It did not even happen, but the retaliation was very swift and very deep, so that eventually the third Governor General Sande would occupy Borneo in order to cut off the link between Manila, Tondo, and Borneo. Okay, so when that link between Manila and Borneo had been put under control, then it would usher in a new phase in the maritime connections of the Philippines with the outside world. It would shift from the western part of the Philippines, meaning to say from the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea, it would shift now to the eastern part of the Philippines towards the Pacific Ocean. And the boats that were being built, they were still built through indigenous materials and indigenous boat builders, but the design would now be coming from Spain. It would be in the design of the galleon in order to survive the very rough sea in the Pacific Ocean. So this would then begin a new phase in the maritime connection and the maritime seaborne relationship between the Philippines and the outside world. Okay, so this ends my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, our first speaker for this morning, Dr. Abrera. We shall be entertaining questions later on after the second speaker. But before we shall proceed to the second speaker, we'll have a health break of 5 minutes. Stay there. We'll be back in 5 minutes. This is our health break. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
paglalakbay mo, ika'y natakot at napagod na. Sinubukang isiping may pag-asa, pero sa dilim ika'y walang makita. Ayaw nung padayon sa lakaw, gamay na lang makita na nato ang adlaw. Ayaw pugi, ayaw kawadi og pag-asa, kayang kahayag karon makita ta. Kung Pinoy ka, isigaw mo, hey! Nandito ako, handang tumulong sa'yo. Kung Pinoy ka, isigaw mo, hey! Sa buong mundo, ako ay dugong Pinoy, sa puso at diwa, simbolo ng pag-asa. 500 taong pakikipag sa buwan tao, ipagdiwang ang kasaysayan. Ako ay dugong Pinoy, sa puso at diwa, simbolo ng pag-asa. Ating mga ninuno'y pasalamatan, tayo na't gumawa ng bagong kasaysayan. Ako ay dugong Pinoy, sa puso at diwa, simbolo ng pag-asa. 500 taong kikipag sa buwan tao, ipagdiwang ang kasaysayan. Ako ay dugong Pinoy, sa puso at diwa, simbolo ng pag-asa. Ating mga ninuno'y pasalamatan, tayo na't gumawa ng
It's a Cebuano term for liwanag or light. And indeed, these days, this past few days, we have been enlightened by more information, more expert knowledge about, not only about the boats and the gold, but it tells us more about our identity as a people. That's the beauty of discussing together, because it makes us understand ourselves more by looking into our beautiful and storied past. Okay, let's proceed now to our second speaker for this morning. She lives in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, and is currently a researcher in the Regional Agency for Archaeological Research in Yogyakarta Province. She holds a bachelor degree in archaeology from Universitas Gadjah Mada in Yogyakarta and a master's degree in maritime archaeology at Flinders University, South Australia, as a scholar. Her master's thesis on the 7th century Punjul Harju boat from Indonesia earned the 2018 Flinders University Master of Maritime Archaeology Best Thesis Award. She actively continues her research in the same field as well as in the terrestrial archaeology in the Hindu-Buddhist period. Her ongoing project is an investigation of the maritime cultural landscape of the Brantas River, East Java, Indonesia. To lead our conversation towards the Lashdlag Punjul Harju boat from Rembang, Indonesia, we give you our second speaker, Ms. Agni Mukhtar. Good morning, Ms. Mukhtar.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. It's very lovely. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Indonesia. My name is Agni Mohtar, and I'm very honored to be here because we have seen so many great presentations before, and I'm a bit nervous actually at the moment because probably I'm the presenter with the least experience and title, I guess. So I hope I will not disappoint you all. I will start my presentation. Please bear with me a second. I'm going to share my screen. Is it working? Can you see it? Okay.
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Great. Yes. So today I'm going to share about the Lashdlag Punjul Harju boat from Rembang, Indonesia. So I hope I can show the details about this particular boat. And kind of like discuss the comparison, especially with the Butuan boats and a few other the Lashdlag vessels from Southeast Asia. As I mentioned earlier, I am currently working for the Regional Office for Archaeological Research in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, but I'm happy to say that I'm officially starting my PhD at the University of Naples, and if anyone can guess what the research topic I'm going to do, well, of course, it will be on the Lashdlag vessels from Indonesia and Southeast Asia. So I will start this presentation. Oh, before I forgot, again, I want to thank the National Quincentennial Committee and Father Saturnino Urios University, and especially to Noel and Kim as the conveners for inviting me to this amazing conference. I have been enjoying many presentations, especially yesterday and today earlier. All the presentations were really great, discussing about the pre-colonial boat building and shipbuilding in the Philippines and Southeast Asia. And I am trying my best not to repeat previous presenters. So of course, you might see a few similar objects and discussion, but I'm trying to kind of like giving some inputs from the Indonesian perspective especially about the connectivity within the Southeast Asia region. Overall, I'm going to talk about the history of the funding of this particular boat, the Punjul Harjo boat, and I'm going to talk about previous archaeology, so the excavation, survey and excavations conducted almost a decade ago, and I'm going to talk about the boat building technology, mostly from my master thesis. And then I will also touch a little bit about the future plans. It's actually the ongoing research conducted on the Punjul Harjo boat, and also a few plans that we have for the near future. Okay, before starting about the Punjul Harjo boat, I would like to start here about the written sources per se. So, of course, we have heard a lot about the European or Chinese written sources when we talk about the Southeast Asian traditional shipbuilding and boat buildings. And in fact, well, it was kind of like the starting point of this kind of studies. But I would like to address other archaeological evidence, and actually it's also there are also written sources. There are the inscriptions found very, very early, well, most of them probably in the early 19th or 20th century, they were found. And many times they are overlooked when we are talking about the traditional Southeast Asian watercraft, especially in Indonesia. And one of them is, you can see here the Kedukan Bukit inscriptions. It is from Sumatra, so it was from the Sriwijaya kingdom. And along with other inscriptions, we can see the words in several variation. This one mentions Samphau, but others also mention Parahu, and others mention Prahu, and also the more common terminology is Prahu. And I'm so happy that in the last 2 days, I heard a very familiar words. Dr. Abrera mentioned about Prahu many times. And yesterday, someone, I guess one of the audience mentioned about the words kapal, and that is the exact same word we use to refer a ship here in Indonesia. And also another word like kayu. Dr. Abrera mentioned about kayu means timber, and that is the exact same word we have here in Indonesia. And this kind of subtle evidence kind of like showing us the connectivity within the Southeast Asian maritime history. And we also have discussed a lot since yesterday when we are talking about old ships and boats, about the function. And we could see from the amazing pictures shown earlier, so many types of ships and boats and all the functions and everything. And this is something that is lacking in archaeological evidence, because we archaeologists are still struggling if we are asked what is the function of the boat. Well, sometimes can be very obvious, like if we found a lot of precious cargo inside the shipwreck. So okay, that's for trade. That was a merchant ships and everything, but many times that is not the case. So the inscriptions can also give us information about the functions. In Indonesia particularly, they were used, of course, for trading, and then for ferry, so to cross the river. And I will also address that the inscriptions kind of like give a lot of hints to us how the river system were very active in the past, and it's no longer the case right now here in Indonesia, but quite a lot inscriptions talk about ships and boats used on the river system. And of course, I will discuss it more later, how the last lap vessels actually connected to the river system. And also one of the inscription mentions about the royal transportation. So the royal kind of like go to somewhere else using the ships along with the troops and everything, and a lot of things they carried and everything. And it's very interesting to kind of like dig in this kind of evidence along with the archaeological evidence, like direct evidence such as shipwrecks and boat remains. And I'm starting to talk about the Punjul Harjo boat for who might not familiar with the location. So we are here in Indonesia, and this is in Java here. And Punjul Harjo site is here on the red dot on the northern coast of Rembang. And the site is only around half a kilometer from the shoreline and only 300 meters from the main road. So it is a very accessible site, very easy to access. And nowadays, people are coming to kind of like sightseeing and everything, because there's also a very famous beach nearby. So yeah, it attracts a lot of tourists actually, well, before COVID at least. Yeah, so but the initial finding of the boat, it was found by the locals when they dig up the sand to make the salt evaporation pond. In fact, today the site is becoming a semi-open museum right now, and still surrounded by a lot of salt evaporation pond. And you can see here a very, well, for me personally, it is a very beautiful picture. It might not be like the ideal condition for archaeologists, because you can see a lot of people were kind of like coming to see what is going on at the time. And some people were kind of like took a few things from inside the boat, as Professor Mangen said yesterday. And you can see here, there's one person over here. He is taking the water from inside the boat, because he and a lot of local people believe that the water from inside the boat was a sacred water that can give them health and long life and etc. And it is a social phenomena that is beautifully captured in this picture. And I really like to kind of like understanding this kind of interaction between the archaeological evidence and the current community. And so after the first finding, of course, a few government institutions came there, and then they did the preliminary surveys and also the rapid documentation, and they built a shelter to kind of like protect the site because, of course, it is on the coastal weather that is quite harsh, especially for the timbers. And even though they did a wonderful job, like quickly built a shelter, but of course, because the timber were exposed, and you can see here, Professor Mangan reported that the comparison of the boat condition in May 2008. So that is a month after the finding, and 6 months later, you really can see here how the stringers are still in a good condition on the left-hand side pictures, and you can see the rapid deterioration on the right-hand pictures. And it was really hard for Indonesian archaeologists, I would say, because it wasn't common to find a boat, an old boat in this condition. So we were kind of like trying to figure out what to do and how to deal with this kind of finding. At the time, so after the initial finding, the report says that the boat from Punjul Harjo is an ancient wooden boat with locks on the inner side of the hull plank, as you can see earlier, and with frames and other components still intact. We still can see the stringers and stanchions and a few bamboo decks. And the amazing thing is we still can see the intact lashings, the ropes still there. And it is a very wonderful sight to see. I wasn't there. I only see them through pictures and documentation made by the Balar Jogja. So my office now is called Balar Jogja. They did an amazing job during the survey and excavations. And so the report from the office says that it was built using the Sun plank and the Leslap technique, of course. If you remember Gay Laksina and Professor Mangan's presentation yesterday, you may have heard a few technical terminology, and like this is Shun plank, and I personally don't like this terminology, and I'm sure Professor Mangan now mentioned it as stitch plank, and that is more proper terminology for this kind of fastening. And to tell you a little bit about the previous archaeology, so a year after the finding, after they did a few surveys, the office, Balar Jogja, excavated the boat in 2009 to reveal the hull remain. And prior to that, so I guess it was during the December 2008, Professor Mangan visited the boat, and he took samples of rope taken for C14 dating. And at the time during the excavation, so they didn't know the age of the boat. And after the excavation finished, you can see here the condition of the boat. It is quite remarkable, to be honest. You can see from the bow to the stern, still intact. You can see the internal components of the hull, a lot of woods and a few bamboos. And of course, the conditions is a bit different in terms of deterioration compared to the first finding. You can see here a lot of frames are still in place, and there is a piece of wood found behind the stern of the boat. So here is the bow and here's the stern, and this timber is a rudder beam. So the team didn't know the function of this timber initially, but later on we know that that is a rudder beam. Only a few upper strakes missing, and as I mentioned many times, we can see the internal strengthenings still intact, and that is why this particular boat is so special, because many times before, the last lock boat remains were found in fragmentary conditions, so only a few planks or only partial part of the boat were found, and that is very difficult to kind of like understand how the boat or the ship were built. So it is really good that we found this particular boat, so we can study this kind of a vessel in depth. And on the left-hand pictures, you've seen these pictures during the Professor Mangan and Gay's presentation about the intact lashing, and this one is very special, I guess, because you can see the plank over here, and of course a lot of mud covering the bottom of the boat. You can see the plank and the lugs over here, and the frame, and how the lashing kind of like tighten not only the frame to the lugs, but also between two lugs on the different planks. So it serves not only as the frame fastening, but also as the planks fastening. And you might remember from previous presentation that it is assumed that a different system was used for the Butuan boats, because mostly the Butuan boats only kind of like use the locks from one planks to kind of like tighten the frame. So there was no connection between adjoining planks, so to say. And of course, on top of the frames, we can see a stringer over here, also tightened using ropes, sugar palm ropes, the same, I guess, with other findings from other parts of Southeast Asia, especially Butuan. And this is a broken one. I'll show you a more complete picture later, but this is a stanchion on top of it, also tightened with ropes. So I hope you don't get bored by me mentioning a lot of ropes, because there were a lot of ropes in this boat. And so the excavation report mentions the entire length of the boat was 15.6 meters from bow to stern, still intact. And on the midships, of course, of the remaining strakes, it was 4.6 meter. I highlighted two measurements here because during my research for my master thesis, and I will talk about it later, I found different measurements, and it is very interesting to kind of study why that happened. And this is what I was talking earlier. The stanchion here, this more or less more complete version of the stanchion sit comfortably on top of a stringer, and you can see here a lot of lashings or ropes, kind of like tighten it, and you can see also variations of patterns, how they kind of like knit the ropes to create different type of lashings. And I from looking to a lot of documentations of the excavations, I can see different part of boat using different patterns of lashings, and that is a very interesting fact. And after the excavation were finished, or around the same times, they got the result from the radiocarbon dating from the ropes taken earlier. And it says that the boat was built in around the 7th to 8th century, making it the oldest intact boat remains in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. And I highlighted the word intact here because, of course, it is not the oldest boat remain ever found, either in Indonesia or Southeast Asia, especially for the last lap vessels. We know that the oldest one is the one found in Pontian from the 3rd century. And for Indonesia, the oldest one was found in Sumatra, in Kolam Pinisi, in Palembang, dated from the 5th century, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So it is not the oldest boat remain found, but it is the oldest intact, because as I said earlier, the previous findings were all fragmentary. And the team made a very beautiful and I say quite accurate drawings of the boat. You can see here, the informations are still in Bahasa Indonesia. I will explain them to you. So you can see here, this is the bow, and this is the stern, and north face that way. And I would like to add that over there, about half a kilometer over there, is the Java Sea. So it sits very conveniently west to east directions. And the team recorded there are 17 frames according to the locks they found. I might comment on this a bit earlier. Oh, sorry, a bit later. And then you can see all the logs one by one was recorded, and you can see that if you compare it with the boot one, it is a bit hard to kind of like identify the strakes of the boat because the shapes of the off and the fore planks are irregular. So, but at the same time, the counting of the strakes were based on the middle planks. Well, we can say that. So yeah, around 5 strakes on the starboard and 6 strakes on the port side. And after they finish the excavations, my office, Balar Jogja, kind of like handed it over to other office authorizes for conservations and preservation. So after that, the boat was being conserved, and it was again a new experience for an Indonesian institution to conserve this kind of findings, like a lot of timbers and everything. So it was a lengthy conservation, and they decided to dismantle the hull because they couldn't find a better way to, or a proper way to conserve the hull in an intact condition. So they dismantled the hull and all the internal components, and they treated the timbers and the ropes using the polyethylene glycol 400, and then later PEG 4000, and they finished the conservation in late 2017. So on January 2018, they reconstructed the hull and put it on display. And the annoying arrow over here is just to show you the time frame. I went there for my master thesis research. So I was lucky to see the boats in dismantled condition. So I could have a better look, especially for the seams of the planks and everything, and the keels, and look for details for the wing ends and everything. It is. I'm very fortunate to got the opportunity to do that. And so for the master thesis, I surveyed the boat December 2017 to January 2018, and the main aims were to do corrections or additions to previous drawings of the boat, and also to record the fastening systems and the hull assembly. And at the end, I wanted to kind of like confirm or correct the prevailing information about this boat. As I mentioned before, I found a different measurements of the boat, and this measurement were taken after the hull was reconstructed. So the hull is still 15.6 meter in length. So there is this is telling us a very good information that the keel itself didn't shrink at all after the exposure a decade ago and during the conservations and after it is being reconstructed. So the hull is just still the same in terms of dimensions. So the length is still 15.6 meter, but the width of the boat amidships, I measured 3.6 meter, while the excavation report says 4.6. So there is quite a large gap up to 1 meter, and that is something that I will discuss later. And from the observation of the dismantling hull, I'm saying that it consists of a keel plank, a wing end on its extremity, 6 strakes on the starboard, and 5 strakes on the port side. Oh, sorry. So I confused earlier between the number of strakes on the starboard and the port side. Apology for that. And each strake is composed of 1 to 4 planks of varying size. And it is not a double-ended vessel because the extremities differ in shape and size. And the boat builder constructed both ends differently. And we will discuss about it a bit later. And on the extremities, the strakes end into a wing end rather than in a stem or a stern post. Gay Laxina was also talking about this. So this is not only for the Punjul Harjo boat, but also for the Butuan boats, and I believe the last lap boats in general. Yeah, so this is a better pictures of the fastenings of the Punjul Harjo boat. You can see here the term stitch plank reversed to here because the planks were also joined by lashings besides dowels. And you can see here I mentioned earlier about the intact ropes, fastening the frames, and also the stringer. And if we are talking about the Leslak boat building and ship buildings, this is, I quoted Gay's words in her dissertations, and I think it is very beautifully worded. It is a process that begins with preparing the keel piece and hull planking with a series of protrusions or locks. When the hull is assembled by its joining with dowels and sometimes in combination with lacing, the locks are drilled with holes and used primarily to fasten frames, thwarts, and other vessel components with ligatures to last them together. So I highlighted in orange color the key components of the Leslak boats, but there is one gray words here. I hope Gaze is here so we can have a discussion later, but I believe the correct term is lashing instead of lacing. And to dig deeper into the boat building technology of Punjul Harjo boat and the comparison to Butuan boats, I suppose. If we are talking about the less luck boat, of course, the first research about this type of boat building technology were focused more on finding commonalities. So Professor Mangan did amazing works on this. So by finding commonalities, he can kind of like divine what is the last luck traditions, and but of course, with more current research, we're looking into particularities, but well, probably accidentally, because I believe we didn't mean to kind of like purposely looking for particularities, but by looking closer to the boat remains, we found a lot of particularities within these commonalities. And this is a very, very interesting topics for me personally, because even though we share the same tradition, the last luck traditions within the Southeast Asia region, we still have particularities. So the variations that is make these traditions beautiful, I think. But for the commonalities, for these presentations, I'm going to discuss about 6 points of the last luck tradition. The first is keel plank, and the second edge joint planks, and the third locks, tambuku, of course, and the fourth the wing ends, the fifth the fastenings, and the sixth timber species. Although for this last point, I'm only going to touch a little bit because we don't have a lot of data about this. So it's very different with Butuan. You saw the same map during the Professor Mangan presentation yesterday. This is just to kind of like show the finding so far. I guess there are quite a few new findings. By new, I mean like 5 years, in 5 years time. So, and I will show you slightly different map later, so we can discuss a little bit about these new findings. And so for my thesis, I came back to the boats and kind of like I said before, I made a few corrections on the initial drawings made by the excavation team. This is a internal components-free conditions of the boats, and this is more or less the current conditions you will see if you visit the site today. And I think the most major addition that I made are the all the dots here throughout the hull, because if we go back to the previous drawing, it didn't give us information that the boat was using the stitch planks. The absence of the dots telling us that the planks were only fastened using dowels. So it is a crucial information that was overlooked by the the excavation team. And I believe it was because all the internal components were still there and still a lot of mud covering the bottom of the hull. So it was difficult to kind of like identify the position, the exact positions of these ligature holes. And from here, so I checked with the actual boat and put all the dots here. So all the dots here are not estimations, so they are the exact holes on the boat. And you can see here there was a miscalculation of the number of frames made by the excavation team. They mentioned 17 frames, and of course, because the system of the boat is the last lock. So the frame was put on top of a line of locks. So we can see here only 15 lines of locks. So I proposed that there were only 15 frames were used on the boat instead of 17. And this red square here to emphasize what you saw on Gay's presentation yesterday. She mentioned about the gap on the admirships of the Butuan boats, and that is also the case for the Punjul Harjo boat. And I haven't have a look closer to other findings in Southeast Asia, but that is something very interesting to study more, because I had a discussion actually with Horst Lipner, who studied the Cirebon wreck, another Laslak vessel found in Cirebon, so in the Java Sea. So it was found underwater 40 meters below the waterline. And he wants to kind of like make a calculations how people in the past, the boat builder in the past, kind of like calculate the distance between the locks and everything. And this kind of gap is surely a very interesting point to be studied more. And another thing I added to the previous drawing is the drawing of the keel plank, because it was impossible for the excavation team to kind of like study the keel plank, because they of course covered in the sand and the mud. Because the boat was dismantled for the conservation, I could measure and drew these drawings of the keel plank. And I tried to kind of like identify the strokes of the boat. As you can see here, I kind of like put different colors to differ one stroke to another. And I did this because it's very difficult if we go to the site and to kind of like identify which plank to another. And I hope it can be useful for future works if anyone doing the conservation work, for example. So if a log over here is broken or everything, and then they can easily identify which particular lock as we know, the edge joint planks, of course, the planks are joined on the seams with lashings and dowels, which are completely discrete from the outer sides of the hull. So it is different with the boot ones, where the planks were only fastened by dowels. And for the Punjul Harjo boat, they use the combinations of lashings and dowels. And for the locks, if you look closer to the Butuan boats, there is a difference between the locks on the keel plank and the locks on the planks on the starboard and the port sides. But that is not the case for Punjul Harjo boats. So the shapes of the locks generally are the same between the locks, the keel plank locks and the hull plank locks. So the majority has rectangular shapes with 4 holes that go from the upper surface to the side. More or less, the holes are in L shapes. I mentioned earlier the irregular shapes consist of triangles or polygons, mostly on the aft and the fore planks. And there are a few continuous ridges locks, but only on the aft planks so far, because the fore planks didn't survive. especially the upper here. This one arm is longer than the other because it's very short over here, where the strakes close in and adjoin to form the bow and the stern. In Punjul Harjo, as I said earlier, it is not a double-ended vessel because the assembly of the hull and the sterns are different. So the bow wing end here is larger than the stern one, and this is the bow wing end. So you can see here there are like rectangular holes, a bit large near the tip of the wing end. I thought it was for mortise and tenons joinery, but apparently there wasn't. And this is the stern wing ends. So the wing ends, they sit on top of the keel plank with three types of fastening joining them, the dowels, the ligature, as well as mortise and tenons. I said just on the previous slides that we can't see here the rectangular holes, but we do see over here and over here, and I'll show you again later. They did use mortise and tenons, but not on the rectangular holes in the middle I showed you earlier. So this is so I knew the rectangular holes in the middle of the wing end were not for mortise and tenon because I look at all the documentations again, and there is a very good pictures of the stern during the excavations, and you can see here on top of the wing end there is some kind of stopper here and a lot of ropes. So a quite large rectangular holes were I suppose were to accommodate this a lot of ropes using to tighten the stopper. And this is the stern assembly. You can see a wing end over here, and there's a keel plank, and not all of the strakes of the boat were connected directly to the wing end. So only the first and the fifth strakes on each side were connected directly to the wing end. And we move on to the fastenings for this boat again, because a lot of the internal components were still there. So we can see that there were three types of fastening: the plank fastening, the frame fastening, and stringer tension fastenings. The frame fastenings, you saw them earlier, also serve as plank fastening as the ropes last to adjacent locks that each is on different planks. So this is like a simulation of two planks of the Punjul Harjo boat. So the holes over here are for the lashings, and you can see the dowels over here, and the holes on the locks, of course, are for the lashing to tighten the frames, as well as to the plank sits next to each other. And this is about the mortise and tenon I mentioned earlier. So the mortise and tenons were only used on the off and the fore planks. So it wasn't used for the middle part of the hull. And this is the picture of one of the aft or fore plank. It's really hard to identify, but you can see the mortise here. And this is just a drawing I made to kind of like show you how the wing end was tightened to the keel plank. So this is the end of the keel plank on the bow, and this is the bow wing end, and there is a large tenons over here, and two holes over here are the holes for the packs. So they use mortise and tenons and lock it with packs. And you can see combinations of dowels and lashings to kind of like tightens the wing end to the keel on the bow as well as on the sterns. So I said before that I mentioned a lot of ropes because it seems that the vegetal ropes are the primary fastenings for the Punjul Harjo boat. And it is supported by dowels for the planks and mortise and tenons for the bow and the stern. And all the internal strengthening components were solely fastened by ropes. And for the last point, I guess, this is the timber species. I didn't took any samples for species identification. The excavation team did took 3 samples, I believe. So one from a plank, one from a stringer, and one from a dowel. And the result came back and said that each different part of the boat use different types of tree, I guess. And it is, of course, very different because Gaylaxina did a very good study about the species of the Butuan boat. And we are working to take more samples from the boat to kind of like having a clearer identification about the timber species used for this boat. Yeah, so from my master thesis, so through analyzing and comparing technology of the Punjul Harjo boat with those of other vessels, it should be placed in the earlier stage of the last lock traditions when ligatures serve as the primary fastening before declining and being entirely replaced by all dowels fastenings like the Butuan boats. And you saw a very clear kind of like diagram shown by Professor Mangen yesterday about kind of like the development stages of these last lock traditions. And there's another new argumentations, question marks, because this is something that I want to work on for my dissertations. You see here, the orange dots are from the maps, the map drawn by Professor Mangen, and I added a few sites. There are missed from Professor Mangen's map. They're quite new. There's Jepara here, Lingga, Tanjung Ranggung, Bongal, Changal, lambur, and there's a flying fish. And I am planning to study these new sites and see if we can get more information about the Laslak traditions. And in terms of future plans, actually, this is a current projects, a collaborative projects between Arkanas, the National Center for Archaeological Research in Indonesia, and the University of Naples Orientale. And we are working on the digital approach for Punjul Harjo boat. The project aims to kind of like do a 3D model from photogrammetry and drawing ship lines, and also digital reconstructions of the upper part of the hull. What we have done so far, so one of my colleagues, two of my colleagues did a very wonderful 3D photogrammetry of the current condition, last year conditions. And this is the, I say, most actual conditions of the Punjul Harjo boat. As you can see, there are quite a lot of deteriorations over here. And yeah, this is something that is going to be very useful also for the Conservations and Preservations Office to kind of like make plans for, you know, ongoing conservation treatment. And this is a comparison between the 3D photogrammetry and the initial drawings made by the excavation team. You can see there is a gap here, and at this moment we thought this is because there were some errors during the reconstructions. So it is likely that the people who reconstructed the boat put the wrong planks in the wrong positions. And of course, there's another possibility because they made a new support for the boats that is influencing the curvature of the hull. And we are working on it, and we are looking closer to these 3D models to kind of like play around with all the planks and everything, and kind of like try to understand what went wrong and what is going on over here. And we are also working on virtual hypothetical reconstructions of the hull. And of course, you're familiar with the depictions of the Borobudur boat. And I try to put different pictures, not only just not to bore you, but also because the most famous picture kind of like show you the port sides of the boat, and that is very beautiful. But for this purpose, I want to show you the other part of the other side of the boat. This is the starboard sides of the boat. And if you remember, the rudder beam found exactly behind the stern, and the team also did a 3D photogrammetry of the beam, and we are working on finding out where the original positions of the beam on the boat. And this particular depiction of the boat in the Borobudur temple kind of like show us a similar shapes here. You can see there are actually two beams one on the stern and supporting a rudder, as you can see here, but there is also one on the bow, and we didn't find any other bow near, any other beam near the bow of the Punjul Harjo boat, but there is something that we are working on. So I don't want to give a remark just now, just to kind of like saving it for my last comment later, but I want to give special thanks first, of course, to my office, Balar Jogja, who did the remarkable work on excavating the boat, and to the Australia Awards, because I did my master on the Australia Award scholarships, and I want to thank Wendy van Forde, my supervisor at Flinders University, and I want to thank Chiara Zazzaro from the University of Naples, who has asked me to join this current ongoing project of the Punjul Harjo boat. And for now, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, terima kasih, Ms. Mukhtar, for sharing us your expertise on the 7th century Punjul Harjo boat from Rembang, Indonesia. We would like to acknowledge our participants. There are some young students, college students right now who are joining us, and perhaps they are wondering, why are we talking about the ancient boats? That will be something that you have to reflect on later on as we go through our session. And we would like also to acknowledge our previous speakers who are with us in this session: Dr. Ligaya Laksina, Dr. Migs Canilao, Father John Young of FSUU, the president of this university, Dr. Bernardita Churchill, our session 11 co-conveners, the ever-dynamic duo of Dr. Feliz Noel Rodriguez and Ms. Kim Dirama. Thank you very much for always joining us. Now let's proceed to the open forum. We can allot 30 minutes for this. For the Zoom participants, you can send your question through the Q&A or in the chat box. And for those who are with us on the social media, you can write them in the comment section, and these will be forwarded to us. In fact, we are already filled with questions here, which we will address to our speakers. Okay, so let's start our question and answer portion to our two resource persons, Dr. Abrera and Ms. Mukhtar. So for the first question, this is addressed for Dr. Abrera. Good morning, Dean Abrera. To what extent do you think did Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam as overarching worldviews promote venturing out to distant islands or lands to trade and exchange in the Indian Ocean, West Philippine Sea? That's from Dr. Migs Canilao.
Thank you. We know, of course, that those that came to the Philippine archipelago bearing those foreign belief systems were traders and not missionaries or proselytizers. So it from the Philippine end, we have historical evidence that it was primarily an economic venture. The maritime connections was primarily an economic venture and not for proselytization. The proselytizing and the conversion came very organically along with the introduction of the of the indigenous populations to those traders who belong to different belief systems. With Islam, it was easier to trade if they were also Muslim traders. And that is why we will find, for example, the earliest Spanish historical records of Manila would refer mistakenly to the residents, to the population as Moors or Muslim. Simply because they found that the people did not eat pork. There was circumcision, and of course the political leaders, Raha Matanda, for example, the political leaders were professed Islam. It could have been, of course, I have no data to say that it was only it was expedient for the political leaders to convert to Islam for economic reasons. There might have been real for the conversion, but the evidence that we have is that it was easier to conduct trade if it was carried out in under the banner of Islam. Earlier than Islam in the Philippines, about the 13th century Chinese records would say that the Chinese who came to Mai, the reference for the Philippines, found that the leaders usually had a custom of going about in white parasols, white umbrellas, and so they brought along white parasols in order to give as a gift to the leaders, to the chiefs, so that they could conduct trade in Mai and other islands around Mai. The white parasol is also mentioned in a historical document. It's by Grunewald. It's in Malacca that the chiefs were conducted their business under a white canopy. And now, why am I saying that? Because I am relating it to a Hindu folklore about there is a goddess that has a white parasol. I forgot the name at the moment. I'll try to retrieve the information, but it tells us about that the influence, very indirect, of course, about the entry of foreign belief systems in the country. So that mention about the white parasol.
Is it Oshisha Sitatapatra?
Yes, that's it. That's right. Okay, so that's the reason why I'm relating it to a belief system. But it's still mentioned in relation to economic exchange.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abrera. And we see that Dr. Laxina is raising her hand. Dr. Laxina, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Ma'am Rochelle. Actually, I have questions for both of our speakers this morning, and I'd like to thank both of you for such wonderful presentations. Should I just ask both of them right now?
Sure, go ahead po.
Okay, so for Dr. Abrera, I'd like to ask about artists such as Monleon and the other illustrators, the other European illustrators, because I might have heard this before, but a lot of the illustrators were not actually, or did not see their subjects in person. I'm not sure if that's you're nodding your head. That's correct.
Yes, Montleon did not see it in person, but he mentions in his introduction that there were a lot of models in the Museo Naval, and they had been collected since the start of colonization. So I would presume, and of course, Montleon, he was a naval engineer. So he knew. That is why he could describe and he could illustrate the boats in very minute detail, because he was really a Navy man, and he had a lot of references. Some of these references were simply documents. So maybe he was illustrating it from imagination according to how he depicted it as described in the document. But he also mentioned for some boats that there were models that he copied from.
Thank you, po. And perhaps I have the translation of Alcina's manuscript, and you mentioned in your presentations, not just today but previously. I was wondering about where the illustrations that accompany Alcina's work came from, if those were drawn by Alcina himself, who was, of course, also a boat builder, or other artists.
Because I am only answering in the negative, from the negative sense, because he did not credit anyone else for the illustrations. So perhaps there is no certainty, but perhaps because of the absence of a credit of the illustrations, it could have been Alcina himself. Because correct, you mentioned it correctly, that Alcina also was a boat builder and he was a navigator. So most likely he knew, he saw the boats that he was illustrating. That's very, very significant. Na he saw the boats; they were correctly drawn. Unlike the Caracoa, for example, the famous illustration of the Caracoa from the Banda Sea, which has a parang a coiling dragon head, that is drawn from a description, as we see, because the prow is usually in the carved from a dragon head. So most likely it is the open mouth of a dragon. So that illustration that we have from the 16th century of the Caracoa in the Banda Sea is not a literal illustration, but it captures the essence of the Caracoa. Kasi there is a dragon head and there is a tail at the end. So especially the warships, they have to have that open mouth of the dragon.
Thank you, Dr. Abrera. That's very enlightening. Agni, first of all, I'd like to say I'm very excited to hear that you're considering, you already have a topic for your dissertation, and I'm already looking forward to it. You mentioned earlier about terminology, and yeah, I have to admit, uh, for all the participants here, Agni and I shared the same supervisor for our thesis. And we did go through a lot of discussions. And I see in the comments that Cook is actually watching on Facebook. Cook is another friend who's studying nautical archaeology in Southeast Asia. And yeah, it's very tricky with terminology. The lacing, the idea of lacing came from the idea of shoelaces where there are existing holes, because maybe you know from Wendy, she doesn't with what you're with a needle into the medium. But yeah, I'm not going to insist on the lacing because I think most people can understand stitching and the other terms. Lashing, I think, is what you use for the planks. So yes, I have no objections to that. So that's not really a question, but just to respond earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Laksina. Actually, we have a comment from the Facebook from Puklihit Abrihada. And she said, thanks, Agni, for mentioning different terms used for fastening. They are indeed different techniques that should be used carefully to avoid confusion. I would propose to do a terminology protocol for ancient Southeast Asian shipbuildings and cordage fastening methods in the near future. So that's perhaps something you can look into in the near future. One question for Ms. Mukhtar. Earlier in the presentation, you mentioned some inscribed Indonesian words that dated back to the 7th century. Did this represent the old system of writing in Indonesia? That's a question from an anonymous attendee.
Yes, thank you for the questions. I would like to comment first on the gaze and books comment about the terminology, if I may. So yeah, I personally prefer the term lacing instead of sewn, as described very beautifully by Gay earlier. But for my presentations, probably did I quote your word wrongly, Gay? Because your dissertations says lacing for the last lag instead of lashing, because the lashings are the independent stitches, and while the lacing is the continuous stitches.
Yeah, it was a few years ago, but I remember wanting to reserve the term lashing when it's connected to the lugs, and that's why I was looking for another term to describe the plank fastening. But actually, we know that there's actually lashed lugs and plank fastening, so it's a bit more confusing now. So no, yeah. There's no problem. That was what I wrote.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Gay. And of course, I agree with Book about the terminology. The thing I found when we are studying the Southeast Asian traditional ships and boat buildings, we do need a consensus, let's say, about the terminology, because the available terminology right now are, well, most of them were from the European point of view, and many times they don't fit the finding that is particular for the Southeast Asian boat building. So that is interesting thing to look forward in the near future. Thanks, Brooke. And for the questions about the inscriptions, in Indonesia, the writing tradition started in around the 5th century when the people from India came to the archipelago and introduced us to the writing system. So the oldest character, the oldest alphabet we knew here in Indonesia is the Palawa alphabet, and the particular inscriptions I showed you earlier that use the Palawa alphabet also, but the language was the Old Malay. And you can say that is the early writing traditions in Indonesia, of course, and then the tradition improved, and some of the inscriptions were written in Sanskrit, but many of them were then written in Old Javanese language and Old Javanese script, especially in Java, but for Sumatra, many of them were written in Old Malay and in Palawa script. So a lot of the languages are now extinct. So the inscription I show you were the early writing traditions in Indonesia. Thank you.
There is a question that is also related to lashing. The arenga piñata rope used for lashing, were they 3-stranded or 4-stranded? That's from Francis Garcia.
I think there are more strands than 4 used in each lashing. Well, depends on which lashing we are talking about. For the lashings of the stringers and stanchions, they use a lesser number of strands, but for the frames and for the planks, they use a lot more. I think like one group of ropes consists up to 10 strands actually.
Thank you very much. Here's a question for Dr. Abrera. This is from Roda Basco Galanco. Are the materials used to construct the boats the same as what we are used in the Philippines? My apologies if this was already answered in the presentation. She had a bad connection earlier.
The materials.
Yep. Or wait. She was asking about the materials used in the construction of the boats. Perhaps both of you can answer this question. Are the materials used in Indonesia the same with those used in the Philippines? And may I ask Dr. Abrera, what were those materials used in the pre-colonial boats in the Philippines?
Okay. I can only answer about the boats in the Philippines. The kinds of wood that were mentioned in around the 17th century are still actually the wood that are used by the Cebutu boat builders. That I saw about a decade ago. That was still the kind of wood that they used, and particularly it remains very significantly to my mind. They called it the iron wood. That it is not going to rot in sea water, so that they had the utmost confidence in the kumpit that they were building for for commercial purposes in Tawi-Tawi, in Sibutu. So yes, the boats, the materials of Philippine boats remain the same across the years for those that are built in the traditional manner.
Okay, thank you very much. How about Dr. Mukhtar? What are the materials used in the boat for Punjul Harjo boats in Indonesia?
So for the reconstructions of the boat, the reconstruction team didn't add a new planks. So they only used the remaining planks because there are a lot of planks. So I think they thought it was enough to kind of like do the reconstructions, and they didn't have enough data to kind of like add more planks to build the complete hull, let's say. But the frames, most of them were broken down into small pieces, also the stringers and the stanchion, and they decided not to put or try to reconstruct the internal components back to the hull. So the current conditions of the hull, as you can see in the pictures and 3D models I show you before, mainly only the hull plank were reconstructed. The only new materials they use for the reconstructions are for the dowels, but I think it is from the similar tree. Locally, it's called kayu pung, and it is a special timber very common to the boat builders around the area right now, and that's the only new materials they added to the reconstructed boat.
Earlier, Dr. Abrera mentioned about ironwood, and we still have that here in Caraga region. We call it magkuno. Here's a question for Dr. Abrera. Do you think animism in the Philippines was the product of Hinduism? Is there any proper exegetical approach to scrutinize the diversity of the Filipino belief system? That's from an anonymous attendee.
No, it's not from Hinduism, because the Austronesians came way ahead of Hinduism, beginning from about 7,000 years BC. So, and there was already, and the animist belief system is found all over the Austronesian world. So, anito, of course, it's an Austronesian word. Even bangka is an Austronesian word. So there, it predates the entry of Hinduism or other belief systems emanating from Asia. I see there's a question here. Pigafetta did not mention the length of the oars. It was Alcina who mentioned the length of the oars, but he was saying, he was mentioning the oars in relation to the both the seafaring culture of the Visayans. He said that when the young boys were still boys, their fathers would make them paddles or oars as their toys, according to their size, so that they would already be playing, rowing the boats even as a young boy from a very young age. And as they grew older, they would be made oars according to their growth, to their size. So it would become longer and longer until they became adults, and then they would have the regular sized paddles, oars, but the size, the length was not given. It was only mentioned by Alcina because he wanted to say that that was the reason why the Visayans could row their boats from sunrise to sundown without getting tired at all. And then they would sleep in the evening, and in the morning they would wake up at dawn and row again without missing a bit, without getting tired, showing any fatigue at all. And he was really mentioning these things to say that to say how deeply embedded the seafaring culture was among the Visayans, and also a reason why they could not catch up with the Paraos that were raiding the colonial coastal states.
Sailing for them was really like second nature. And you mentioned earlier there were some words that were used before, which we are using until now, like baloto, that has become baroto, that's a boat, and bangga. We still use that until now. Thank you very much, Dr. Abrera. Here's a question from Dr. Canilao to Ms. Mokhtar. Greetings, Professor Mokhtar. Can you comment on possible locations of what the South Indians called Subharnadipa, or Isles of Gold, and Suvarnabhumi, Land of Gold? Terima kasih.
Okay, thank you. Well, although I'm honored, I'm not a professor, I'm not even a doctor, so I'm on my way there, fingers crossed, but thank you. Yes, Suvarnadipa or Suvarnabhumi, it is identified as Sumatra in Indonesia because in a lot of chronicles and written sources, it is said because the island produced a lot of gold. So Swarna means gold. And it is interesting that you asked that questions because if we go back to the map of the Laslak boats found so far, the majority of the finding were from the Sumatra, and especially near the Sriwijaya Kingdom. And I think this conference itself has a very good topic, gold and boat building, and I think that is a very good idea for us Indonesians to kind of like look deeper. What is the connection between this Suvarnadipa, so the island of gold, and the use of a lot of Laslak boats and ships. Thank you.
Thank you. And here's a question for Dr. Abrera from Mark Disolok. I would like to clarify, is there evidence also that there are other people from other countries in Southeast Asia who migrated to the Philippines way before the Spanish came, aside from the purposes of trading and commerce?
Yes. There is a... we have sufficient historical records to show that, but they were actually primarily traders, and the migration was not really waves of migration coming here, but it started in trading, and eventually, and it was still recorded even by Legazpi in the late 16th century, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, when he said that when they came to Manila, there had been just 4 days prior, there had been a ship from Siam that had anchored in Manila, and it had given it left a trader in the area. So he was still there because he continued to trade. And then probably when the boat would return, I think it would be going to China from the Philippines. from Siam to the Philippines and then to China, and then upon return it would probably be picking up the trader who was left behind in order to continue the business of trade. So it would start from there, and eventually there would be marriages that would happen. It would involve then also some form of treaty or an arrangement in order for them to continue their economic exchange in a peaceful manner. So that would be how, for example, the blood compact would be developed. Because we would find the blood compact in the 16th century, but not earlier. With the Chinese, for example, there was no record of a blood compact with those foreign traders.
Okay, we still have time to the last two questions. One is, I think, for Dr. Abrera. What was the early language used by datos, raha, and people for them to communicate and understand what they were building, such as the ancient boats, during the pre-colonial period?
Okay. It would be a form of Old Malay, something that would be understood as a trade language within the region, within that Southeast Asian region. Of course, Pigafetta, going back to Pigafetta, he says that their slave, the Magellan slave from Sumatra, spoke to the men from Samar and then from Cebu, and they understood each other. And then he mentions that the king knew more languages than the others, and probably it was because usually the king would be engaged, the datu or the raha would be engaged in trade. So there was definitely a trade language. If we go back to the Laguna Copper Plate had Old Malay, Old Javanese, Old Tagalog, that was transcribed by Anton Postma. So, and that record, it was a receipt, a certification of payment. It was honored not only in the Tagalog area, but it referred to other areas outside of the archipelago. So definitely there was a trade language. I also refer to a lecture made by the late William Henry Scott, and he mentioned that if you look at Filipinos at present, even if they do not undergo any form of formal education, they will always have two languages with them. They will have the mother tongue, and then they will have a trade language. So even the indigenous peoples, they would have a trade language. The Cordillera, the trade language would be Ilocano. Among the Mindoro, Mangyan, the trade language would be Tagalog. So there will always be a trade language that the people will understand within that area.
But in fact, until now, there are some Indonesian words which we find very similar with ours, and this I think we can attribute to those trading between our people and yours. Actually, last two questions. With those kind of planks and logs used, how long would a boat last? Ms. Mukhtar, would you like to answer first?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Wow, that is a very difficult question. I don't have the exact answer for that, but according to an ethno-archaeological studies I just conducted a few months ago, so we visited a boat builder that, so to understand a boat building practice that is still active today in Indonesia, in northern coast of Java, so not that far from the Punjul Harjo boat. They use a 3 centimeters thick plank for their boat, and when we asked the boat builder, they say, well, it will last for 30 years to 50 years. That is for a 3 centimeters thick plank. Mm-hmm. And for the Punjul Harjo boat, it's even thicker. So the planks are generally 5 centimeters. And I can say for the Punjul Harjo boat, because of all the fastenings, it was a very robust boat. So I guess it was last longer than 30 years because all the keel and all the thickness of the planks and supported by all the strengthening. My estimations is longer than 30 years and probably even longer than 50 years.
How about the Philippines?
Rochelle, I just recalled from what Agdi mentioned, I just recalled something from the Spanish records when they were already building galleons in the Philippines, because they wanted the Philippine boat builders to build the galleons very, very quickly because first of all, they were interested in trade, and secondly, the Dutch who were fighting them had already followed them to Manila, and they had to defend themselves against the Dutch, and so they needed all their ships built in a very short span of time. And so the process also, the traditional indigenous process was no longer observed because they
had to speed it up.
Yes, they had to speed it up. So in 5 months, they had to build, or even shorter, they had to have a galleon. Mm-hmm. But the indigenous boat building process involved keeping the planks in before they had to build it, they had to wait. They had to cut the trees at a particular time. Usually, it was at the season of the new moon, because there was a symbolic reference. Of course, there was a river in the sky, and the moon was like a bangka, was like a boat, and so they were copying that design of the moon in the river in the sky. So they had to cut at the time of the new moon, which was no longer observed during the cutting of the trees for the galleon. And then they had to wait until the planks were right. And that is still being observed by the traditional builders in Cebutu. But the galleon builders, the managers, they could not wait for months for the planks to season. And that seasoning actually involved because the moisture had to be removed. And then you had to have the correct amount of moisture in the planks. That is why they had to season the planks by not building from freshly cut wood. So they were complaining, the Spanish officials, they were complaining that why was it that the boats of the Filipinos, they said, aside from being so swift and so light, The boats of the Filipinos, it was already 10 years and they did not need to replace any part yet. But then, with the boats that were being built for the Spaniards, they were using the same builders and they were using the same kind of wood. And yet, after 3 years, they had already to replace major parts. And one of the reasons would be because they were not following the seasoning process precisely. So,
And that's
it
one
was
of
not
the,
simply, yes, not just the skill.
and it
but-
takes a lot of time. Time is of essence at that time.
That's
Okay.
right.
There was one comment earlier from Ms. Vilma Buaro. Boat building of our early traditions are very different nowadays. I think the old one are more difficult, hard to make. Kudos to the old builders. Okay, there is another question here for the both of you. Did the pre-colonial ships of Indonesian Sulu, pre-colonial shipbuilders, use red lawaan wood, Shorio negrosensis, for their boats like those of Vintas built by Samabajao before? Did they use this particular wood, red lawaan wood?
Yes, I remember the wood lawaan. It was mentioned in the historical documents, but right now I do not recall if it mentions red lawaan. But lawaan, yes, I recall that was mentioned in the indigenous Philippine boats that was being used.
How about in Indonesia? Did they use a particular wood, red lawaan?
No, not the same, that specific wood. But I think we need more studies on this because I have to admit that the wood species studies on the boat remains found so far in Indonesia is still very limited at the moment. Only from the Punjul Harjo boat, I can say that they use a different type of wood, but there is also a possibility of other boats using the same. We just don't know yet. So yeah, at this moment, because I don't have enough data to say a conclusive answer, they use different types of wood.
That could be another field to study. And finally, one last question for Ms. Mukhtar. I would like to ask if the other Indonesian boats have the headings of a dragon or maybe sort of their own spiritual or mythical creatures in the bow or at the stern, perhaps. That's from Rusty Beltran.
I'm sorry, Ma'am Rosel, do you mind repeating?
Do the Indonesian boats have the same head of the dragon or maybe a sort of your own spiritual creatures in the bow or in the stern, perhaps?
Okay, so if from the archaeological evidence of the Leslak boat, we didn't find that kind of like the bow ornaments or the stern ornaments. But of course, we know from younger boats, like the traditional boats still in use today. We have the dragon boats and a few boats owned by the royals in Java. They also have ornaments for the bow and possibly the stern of the ships, but not particularly from the Leslak boats. Yeah, but yeah, we do have, but more modern type of boats.
Thank you very much to our resource speakers for having shared your knowledge, your expert knowledge in this boat building. And we would like to give you a certificate of appreciation, which I'd like to read. The certificate of appreciation is awarded to Dr. Maria Bernadette Abrera and Ms. Agni Mukhtar for their presentation in the Philippine International Quincentennial Conference, Session 11, entitled Early Philippine and Southeast Asian Boat Building and Gold Crafting Technology, on December 6 to 10, 2021 via Zoom webinar. This session is co-convened with Father Saturnino Urias University and the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. The National Quincentennial Committee was created through Executive Order Number 55, Series of 2018, to prepare the country in commemorating the 500th anniversary of the victory at Mactan, the Philippine part in the First Circumnavigation of the world and other related events. The Philippine International Quincentennial Conference is also in solidarity with the Year of Filipino Pre-Colonial Ancestors and the Philippine-Spanish Friendship Day. Given today, 9th of December 2021, signed Dr. Rene Escalante, Executive Director, National Quincentennial Committee, Chairman, National Historical Commission of the Philippines, Chief Convener, Philippine International Quincentennial Conference. And we are awarding the certificate to Dr. Abrera and Ms. Mukhtar. A soft copy of this will be sent to you as soon as we can. Before we end our session, we would like to point out some takeaways from this. From Dr. Abrera's lecture, we saw how the boats were developed and were built during the pre-colonial Philippines. We also learned that the tragic 1587 Tondo conspiracy gave way to a new maritime connection, a shift from the South China Sea towards the East, the Pacific Ocean. From Ms. Mukhtar's lecture, we saw how a discovery of a single boat can unlock remarkable data, which is essential to see the development of maritime archaeology through the centuries, especially in Indonesia. And we would like again to thank you. Our participants are sending their profuse appreciation for this very interesting lecture. Now we would like to remind our attendees that the Zoom system has automatically logged your attendance for today. Please check your emails for the panel evaluation form that will be sent within the next 24 hours. And for updates on this conference, I turn you over to Dr. Feliz Noel Rodriguez.
And thank you very much for being with us in this panel that spans actually maritime connections and goes through different geographic locations from especially the Indonesia region to Butuan, and putting boats in context, so the last log. But aside from the geographic spans, we have looked here as well as centuries of difference, right? So the historical context should be noted as well, with the Punjul Harjo all the way back to the 7th century, if I'm not mistaken, and going with Dr. Abrera much later. And so we continue this conversation. So please join us this afternoon at 2 p.m. For a talk by Dr. Mary Jane Louise A. Bolugna on maritime exchange and trade, an avenue for linking people and sharing culture. And most importantly, after Dr. Bolugna's talk, there will be a video presentation on Philippine boat building traditions of the Sama of Tawi-Tawi. This is sourced from the International Information and Networking Center for Intangible Cultural Heritage in the Asia-Pacific region, the UNESCO. So this conference started on December 6 and it will end tomorrow, December 10. Continue to join us for more deep and meaningful discussions on early Philippine and Southeast Asian boat building and gold crafting technology. On behalf of the Father Saturnino Urias University and the National Quincentennial Committee, we wish to thank as well all those behind the scenes, the conference secretariat, Mr. Joseph Alec Garadilla, and of course, thank you as well to our speakers, most importantly for giving graciously their time with us and sharing their knowledge. Dr. Maria Bernadette Abrera on the maritime connections and pre-colonial Philippine boats and shipbuilding. And of course, to Ms. Agni Mokhtar on the Lash Log Punjul Harjo boat from Rembang, Indonesia. Thank you as well, of course, to our moderator, Ms. Rochelle A. Valencia, who has, as always, expertly maneuvered all the discussions and all the comments on the chat box, which was quite a number. And so this is Feliz Noel Rodriguez, co-convener of this conference, saying thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you once again, Dr. Noel and Ms. Kim Dirama, the ever dynamic duo behind this session 11 of this conference. And we would like to tell our participants, if you have questions about PowerPoint slides, please send your questions and queries to an email address that will be sent to you with the evaluation link. Okay, and then if you want to go back to this presentation, you can check on the FB pages, which we mentioned earlier. You can check the videos there. It will be there, and you can watch it anytime at your pleasure. And this is the end of our session this morning. Salamat kadyaw. Terima kasih. This has been Rochelle Valencia of Father Saturnino Urias University, Butuan City, Philippines. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.